I first got interested in investing when I was at the University of Florida and starting in 2007. And I still don't know to this day. I'll have to ask my buddy. One buddy and I, we became kind of obsessed with the Berkshire Hathaway shareholder letters and everything about Warren Buffett. And I remember one summer in particular, I think we went to the library, multiple times a week and just dug in on everything that we could find about Berkshire and reading about Coca-Cola and all that other kind of stuff. We actually we drove from University of Florida, which is in Gainesville, Florida, thankfully, somewhat northern Florida. We drove from there to Omaha for one of the annual meetings. As I remember, it was 20 or 25 hours each way. So that was quite a haul to get there, and we were college kids, so you can imagine the kind of accommodations we were staying in. But we had a great time. We were obsessed with this stuff. At some point around then, when I was still in college, I stumbled across the Larry Cunningham's book, The Essays of Warren Buffett, and for me, it was a book that was really formative in terms of my learnings as a young investor. It laid out a number of different topics in a way that was really clear and concise, and it was just easier than, especially as someone who was starting from just starting to build my foundation. It was easier than just pulling up a couple of decades of shareholder letters in a row and trying to grasp everything that was being said there. So that book was really important to me as a young investor. So when I saw in 2018 that, I think in working with CNBC, I believe that Berkshire decided to release the annual meetings back to 1994. I think it clicked with me fairly early on that there'd probably be an opportunity to do something similar, and obviously on the shareholder letters, you can kind of pull them up fairly easily and Control F if you want to find something about capital allocation, whatever it may be. That's a lot harder when you're talking about, I believe it's north of 150 hours of YouTube videos from the annual meeting. So yeah, I eventually got in contact with someone from Harriman House and signed a deal to, well, I can't remember specifically when I signed the deal, but I made the decision that I was going to write this book, and I told them, okay, I can't, this is contingent upon getting approval from Berkshire, because I'm not going to have this thing come out and, then they reach out to me and say, what the hell do you think you're doing? This isn't your content. This isn't your IP. So I reached out to Warren and sent him an email, and thankfully I got the word back that they were okay with me doing it. So that's when it became a real thing. I may have underestimated how much work it was. It took a couple of years to finally get it across the finish line, but it helped that it was, obviously, I love the source material. I love listening to the meetings and things like that. So for something that took a lot of time and was a decent amount of work, at least it was, mostly enjoyable to go through all the meetings. So I worked on it for a handful of years, and it finally came out here in January of 25. So it was a long process, and I'm quite glad that it is near the finish line. It seems like it's almost done.
Yeah, well, it's out so people can buy it, but yeah, you have to talk to people like me and try and sell it now. That's the issue, and for our audience. But yeah, I'm interested to hear. You said it's 30 years of content. I'm sure it's absolutely amazing to hear all that and potentially see the evolution. So, was there anything that maybe shocked or surprised you, or that took you off guard when sort of watching the whole thing?
Yeah, it's always hard to answer these questions because I'm someone who's been so obsessed with all this stuff for a long. I've always struggled to figure out the exact count, but I've gone to like 7 or 8 or 9 meetings or something over the past 20, 15, almost 20 years now. And obviously I've read all the letters and all that jazz, so it's hard for me to remember what would have surprised me at one point in time that now when I went back through again surprised me. I think some of their commentary around, well, particularly throughout the 90s, the commentary didn't surprise me in terms of how they were talking about tech stocks and basically telling people that's not what they do. If they thought they could do that, then people should go do it themselves. They want to invest in particular companies or sectors. Berkshire was going to stick to its knitting, and Warren and Charlie were going to invest in things that they thought they could do well investing in. That didn't particularly surprise me. As we get through 2010 and into the period when Warren invested in IBM, and you're also at a period in time where the FANG stocks are becoming a more prominent part of the broader conversation in the investment community. That's when they had some interesting conversations around companies like Apple and Google and Amazon. That the prominent one in hindsight is basically saying that they never have the confidence on a company like Apple that they do on something like BNSF. And I think in one meeting in particular, I'd pull it up in the book, but I think Warren basically specifically says that they're very unlikely to invest in a company like Apple or Google, despite it having many favorable characteristics. I believe it was the 2013 meeting where he said that. Fast forward, I guess it would be almost a decade to be fair, but fast forward almost a decade, and their position in Apple was at one point approaching $200 billion. Not exactly a small position. And there's other examples of this like this throughout the book, and it helps to. It's one thing I really like about the book is being able to show these things chronologically helps you to see how the thought process may change over time. And again, it's never like a gotcha thing, like they were wrong about XYZ thing. It's just seeing how their way of thinking about something changes over time. And for me, it's really informative in thinking in inform my own investment philosophy and process. So that's one pretty prominent example. I'm sure there are others, but they don't come to the top of my head at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's a really important lesson from, I guess, their careers as well, just that evolution of, as you said, it's not too far, but they are obviously evolving. And as an example of, Charlie Munger sort of convincing Warren that the cigar butts aren't where you should be. It should be the real quality. So it seems like they're sort of willing to learn to an extent, I guess.
Yeah, I just say, I mean, it is. I've never really put this together, at least in a way publicly, but like it is interesting to think that Warren makes an investment in IBM, which is that's traditionally defined a tech company, after a period where they never said it this way, but they were always perceived as they're unwilling to invest in tech companies. I mean, the way that they explicitly said it's a bit different than that. But anyways, so he then makes an investment that seems out of character for him. Fast forward a couple of years, the investment, I mean, it wasn't a terrible investment, but I think it's basically somewhere close to break even. It certainly wasn't a successful investment. You could understand someone in his position from there basically saying that's enough of this. I'm not gonna venture into this space anymore. I'm gonna stick with something that feels a bit closer to home. And instead, he went out and made a pretty significant investment in Apple. I think somewhat prodded by from Todd and Ted, if I remember correctly, in terms of the learnings or becoming, more interested in the company. He then goes out and makes a pretty significant investment in Apple, which at the end of the day ended up generating a very significant amount of value for Berkshire Hathaway shareholders. I think something, at least on pre-tax basis, well north of $100 billion. So I'm very glad that he did that.
Yeah, it definitely helps out all the shareholders. So, as you said, you're a bit of an expert. I guess you also have a passion of following Warren and Charlie, and you've sort of been following them for a while. But was there any, like, I guess, lessons from watching back on them all that sort of that it cemented that you'd already known, but maybe it reminds you of, or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think people have said this before. It's like going to church, right? Where you're not, or you're not really hearing anything new, but there's something to be said for kind of learning it again, or hearing it again. And I think a lot of the things around how they think about incentives and paying managers and things like that, where you pull up any typical S&P 500 company, you can pull up a proxy statement, and you just read it from page 1 to the end. A lot of the times you'll walk away without clarity on how people are actually paid, without clarity on whether it's actually a sensible compensation structure, potentially without clarity on exactly what the desired outcomes are for the following year. If they say 20% of their comp's based on revenue growth, but you don't have any context for what the kind of the measures are against that, it can only do you so much good. So, point being, you live in those for enough time, and you just start to think that that's normal and that's the way things have to be. And you come back and listen to their words on some of these topics, or you listen to them talk through exactly how they compensate managers at the subsidiaries and how straightforward and clear that approach is. And again, it's just like, it's refreshing in terms of reminding yourself, oh, that's right. Like, not all companies do it this way, and a lot of this is basically BS for various reasons. But you can avoid these things depending how stringent you're willing to be in terms of the criteria that you require for a company or team that you're going to partner with. So I think things like that are really just a really good reminder in terms of what exactly you're trying to do as part of your investment process and your investment philosophy, and then how do you go out and apply that in a world where a lot of companies are run in a way that's one of the things that have become kind of the norm are um, questionable, to say the least. I mean, you can think about a period that is covered in the book, like what happened with stock option accounting in the late '90s, I believe, and when FASB, I believe it was, basically said that expensing stock options was optional. I think Warren noted at the time that there was one or two companies in, I believe it was the S&P 500, who elected to expense stock options when given the option. And something that, certainly with the benefit of hindsight, any reasonable conversation on this topic, you'd go, yeah, that certainly is an expense. Of course, it should be included in the income statement. But when given the choice, nearly 100% of companies chose to not take that route. They chose to take the route that was most beneficial to their reported results. So again, I just think there's a lot to be said for that, and a lot to think about there as you look at companies and management teams that, especially if you're a long-term investor, like people that you're going to partner with and trust.